My name is Tanya Henderson, and this is the final episode of season 1 of Blitz and Bloom. And honestly, it feels right to end season 1 where my entire football story began. Women's football. That's the foundation. This finale is about returning to that foundation. The women's game that built me, the conversations that shaped season 1, and the builders who are carrying football forward. It's where I learned the game through a different lens, where I found parts of myself I didn't know existed, and where I started to understand the weight of what football asks from you and the power of what it gives back. And now, in a very full circle moment, I'm coming out of retirement to play at the Canadian Women's Nationals, back with Alberta, back inside the game that built so much of me. The last time I played a full competitive season was in 2019. I got a couple practices in back before 2022, before leaving for BC, but realistically, I have not been on the field as a tackle football athlete for the last 4 years. But I haven't been away from the game, and I haven't exactly been sitting around letting my fitness or athleticism slide either. If anything, I understand football now in a way I never could have when I was just playing it. And I'm coming back with a body that has kept training, an athleticism that has kept evolving, and a football mind that sees the game differently. And now I get to step back on the field with a coach's brain and an athlete's body. And I'm fired up, not just for the cute full circle moment or nostalgia. I'm fired up to compete. And I'm fired up because women's football is in a really exciting space right now. So today, we're closing season 1 by looking back, looking around, and looking ahead. We're going to talk about women's nationals, what it means to me to be back on the field, 6 lessons from season 1 that stayed with me, a little Blitz and Bloom CFL preseason ranking action, and what is coming in season 2. Because season 1 may be ending, but the story certainly is not. Not even close. Yesterday, May 25th, the senior women's Team Alberta roster was announced. Just in time to film this episode, and your girl made the cut. I guess I still got it. After 4 flights, 2 weekends, 8 practices, and 1 very questionable hotel room, the dust has settled and we're going to nationals. It's been 10 years since this tournament last took place. Bold proof on the impact COVID had on the growth of women's football in Canada. In 2016, we competed in Regina at vintage Mosaic Stadium and finished the week with a bronze medal against Team Atlantic. Fast forward to 2026, the same 4 teams who competed in 2016, Saskatchewan, Alberta, Quebec, and Team Atlantic, returned to Saskatchewan, but this time we're kicking it in Saskatoon. So it's official. I have yet to participate or coach in a Football Canada sanctioned event that did not take place in Saskatchewan. Coming back to play at Women's Nationals is mind-blowingly exciting. I never thought I'd have the opportunity to step back on the field in a tackle football capacity. The last time I played a full season was 2019, my last real competitive season with the Edmonton Storm. I'm older, but I'm also smarter. And I mean, Gary Peters and TJ Lee are both still doing it at my age, so why not me? Which is part of what makes it so exciting. I'm coming back with 3 years of CFL experience, 3 years of learning from some of the best football minds in this country, and 3 years of seeing up close what true leadership, vulnerability, trust, and excellence actually look like. And that's the part I'm the most curious about. What does it feel like to play again after just coaching for so long? What does it feel like to line up with a coach's brain and an athlete's body? And in classic Tanya Henderson football fashion, I showed up as a defensive player and left with offensive experience and expectations. Defense is always where my heart and soul will be. And playing defensive line is a way of life and a mentality that I am fully committed to. But I'm not mad about running back reps. And luckily, I'll never have to go up against myself on defense. Because you learn quickly, a couple reps in as a running back, why the defense is so annoying. And you learn that being tackled is not the same experience as tackling. But honestly, it all feels so fitting because women's football has always required versatility. You learn to adapt, play where you're needed. You learn that the game is not always going to be perfect and polished and neatly packaged. Sometimes you just have to get in there and compete. And I fucking love that. I love the toughness of it, the creativity of it, the chaos of it. I love the fact that women's football has always been built by people willing to do whatever needed to be done. And that brings me to one of the coolest parts about going back to women's nationals with Team Alberta. It's who I get to share this field with. Because it's not just a roster, it's a timeline. There are women on that field who I started my football career with. There are women I spent years competing against. There are teammates who I ended my Edmonton Storm career with. There are women who played the very first year of girls football in Alberta, alongside women who they coached in that same girls' league who now also coach the girls' league. There are 4 generations of women's football on this team. That's the part that gives me chills. Because that means this game is not just growing outward, it's growing generationally. And then there are the people like Jamie, who is also out in BC, helping me grow girls football here. There's Shaylee, who spent the last few years working with the Edmonton Elks and has continued to show what it looks like for women to carve out space and make an impact inside football organizations. And to be on the field with all of that at once is honestly hard to put into words. It's a great reminder that this was never just about playing. It was about building something that could outlive one version of us. And I think that's what makes women's nationals feel so meaningful this year. For me, coming back to play is incredibly personal. And honestly, it feels good to be back in the sport for me, not because of what it represents, not because of what it does for anyone else, but because I still want this. I still desire it. And that matters too. But being on the field with women from so many different chapters of this game makes it bigger than personal. And that brings me back to season 1 of Blitz and Bloom. Because this season was all about the human side of football and gave us 7 conversations with 7 outstanding athletes and coaches in the Canadian Football League. TJ Lee, Vernon Adams Jr., John Bowman, Nathan Rourke, Jonah Tavai, Manny Rugumba, Andrew Peirson. 7 different football lives. And what I loved most is that every single one of them organically reminded us that football is never just football. TJ Lee gave us a conversation about leadership, vulnerability, steadiness, and what it means to be someone a locker room trusts. Vernon Adams Jr. brought us into pressure, confidence, honesty, and the challenge of continuing to show up when people keep questioning who you are. John Bowman's episode was about longevity, edge, evolution, and what it takes to stay in a league that does not promise you tomorrow. Nathan Rourke gave us expectations, joy, pressure, and the process of trying to fall back in love with the game. Jonah Tavai's story brought us into family, competition, support, and the foundation that keeps you grounded. Manny Rugumba's conversation explored identity, transition, family, purpose, and who you are when football no longer gets to be the whole answer. And Andrew Peirson reminded us of the quiet work. Service, offensive line life, community, and what it means to be dependable without needing constant applause. And when I look back at season 1, I don't just think about the guests. I think about the lessons. Every conversation gave me something different. A different relationship with the game, a different battle, a different strength, and a different piece of wisdom that reminded me why the show needed to exist. So instead of doing my top favorite moments in a traditional way, I want to talk about the 6 lessons from season 1 that stayed with me. The more I look back, the more obvious it becomes that season 1 was never about football. It was about identity, leadership, family, pressure, joy, longevity, service, and all the ways this game shapes who you are becoming. Lesson 1: leadership is not always loud. The first lesson came from TJ Lee, and the lesson was this: leadership is not always loud. Sometimes leadership is the energy people trust. TJ talked about wanting to be known as the best teammate ever. And what I loved about that is that he didn't frame it around speeches, status, or being the loudest person in the room. He talked about pouring into people, helping them, picking them up, reminding them of the bigger picture, teaching life skills through sports. And that is leadership. Not the performative version, not the version that needs everyone to know that it's leading, the real version. The version people feel when things are hard. The version that changes a locker room without needing to announce itself. And I think that is one of the most powerful things about TJ. His leadership always felt human first, from the very first day I met him. He's a football player, yeah, a great one. But he's also a father, a mentor, a teacher, a teammate, and someone who has always understood that people are more than what they produce on a field. Because in football, we talk a lot about leadership. We use the word all the time, but sometimes we make it too complicated. Sometimes leadership is just being steady enough that people can lean on you. TJ said he wanted to be known as the best teammate ever, and honestly, I don't think there are many better football legacies than that. Lesson 2: vulnerability does not make you weak. It makes the room more honest. The second lesson connects back to TJ, but it also bridges into VA. In my conversation with TJ, we talked about what it means to be a vulnerable leader. Someone who doesn't need to pretend everything is fine, perform toughness, or act like they have every answer. Someone who can say, I don't know, and keep moving forward. That kind of honesty matters in football because the sport still has this old school obsession with pretending. Pretending you're not hurt, never unsure, never shaken, and never affected by pressure. But that's not real leadership. That is performance. And I think both VA and TJ challenge that in different ways. VA has lived a career under pressure and expectation. Traded, benched, questioned, praised, doubted, written off, brought back. Sometimes all in the same season. And yet, what stood out to me was the way he talked about the journey. Not like it was supposed to be a perfect straight line, but like every trade, benching, reset, and hard season had taught him something, stretched him in some way, and forced him to keep maturing. There was something really powerful in the way VA talked about losing confidence and being honest about that. Because a lot of people want vulnerability after the fact. They want it once the story has a nice ending. They want it once the athlete has already overcome the thing. They want the polished version of honesty. But real vulnerability usually happens in the middle. It's the uncertainty, in the part where you don't actually know how or if it's going to even work out yet. And that's what makes it so powerful. What I respect about both TJ and VA is that they challenge this idea that leaders have to be emotionally untouchable. They don't. They have to be grounded enough to tell the truth and still take the next step. Lesson 3: joy is not soft. Joy is a performance tool. This came from Nathan Rourke. That conversation really stayed with me because Nathan talked about needing to fall back in love with football. And I think that is something a lot of athletes understand, even if they don't always say it out loud. Sometimes the game you love gets really heavy. the expectations, the pressure, the criticism, the business, the injuries, the movement, the comparison, the public opinion, all of it starts to stack up. And sometimes, without even realizing it, you get separated from the part of you that just loved playing. Nathan talked about playing for the 10-year-old version of himself. And I loved that because it's such a simple idea, but it hits hard. That younger version of you wasn't worried about media narratives, contracts, outside expectations, or what everyone else thought the game was supposed to become. That version of you just loved playing. And sometimes, as an athlete, the most disciplined thing you can do is find your way back to that. Nate also talked about setting daily goals that were not tied to outcomes. Things like smiling more, being a great teammate, and being intentional about how he moved through the day. That stands out to me because high performance spaces can make joy feel secondary, when really, joy can be part of the discipline. It is not the opposite of discipline. Sometimes it is exactly what allows discipline to last. It's what keeps you from being bitter, what keeps you connected to why you started, and what brings your best version back to the surface. And that lesson carries far beyond football. Lesson 4: longevity requires evolution. John Bowman's conversation was such a good reminder that longevity is not just about being talented enough to stay, it's about being willing to change. He talked about the phases of a career. First wanting to make the team, then wanting to get paid, then wanting to win, and eventually becoming something more than just the player trying to survive. Physically, he had to evolve too, moving from the meathead generation into training built around mobility, movement, speed, reps, and longevity. That is the part people miss when they look at long careers from the outside. They see the resume, the Hall of Fame, the sacks, the legacy, but they rarely see the constant reinvention required to stay relevant. Lesson 5: your foundation decides how you handle the noise. The fifth lesson came strong through Jonah Tavai and Manny Rugumba. Jonah's episode reminded me of that in such a grounded, funny, powerful way. Yes, we talked about his unhinged meal choices, but underneath that humor, Jonah's episode from start to finish was really about family. He talked about growing up in this huge competitive family where everything became a competition. Who gets in the car first? Who gets the most tackles? Who wins at cards? Who wins at anything? But the thing that stood out to me was not just the competition. It was the support underneath it. His brothers challenged him, but they also believed in him. And then there was his mom. His mom was the foundation. She was the one getting them to practices, organizing schedules, and keeping everyone grounded. And what I loved most was that the way home seemed to stay home, no matter what was happening outside of it. It didn't matter who was playing where, who had success, who had attention, or who was being compared to who. The standard stayed the same. Be respectful, clean up after yourself, say your prayers, and remember where you came from. Football has a tendency to make everything feel so much bigger than it is. But when your foundation is strong, it brings everything back down to earth. Manny's episode carried that same lesson, but in a different way. His story is massive. Family, survival, movement, football, transition, identity. But the thing that really stayed with me was how clearly he understood that football revealed him, but it did not define him, which is such a mature way to look at the game. Because football gives you a lot. But if you're not careful, it can also convince you that you are only valuable when you are performing. Manny pushed back against that. When I asked him who Emmanuel Rugumba is, stripped of football, stripped of titles, stripped of performance, he called himself a builder. A builder of people, a builder of hope. Which stands out because so many athletes spend years being asked what they do. Manny answered by telling us who he is. And one of my favorite lines from the entire season came from him. Where you are is not who you are, and what you are becoming is greater than what you failed at. That line is straight up Blitz and Bloom. It's the whole point. You are not just your best moment, your worst moment, the thing people know you for, or the thing you lost. You are what you are building from it. Lesson 6. The quiet work still matters. The 6th lesson came from Andrew Peirson, and it is an offensive line lesson in a nutshell. Offensive linemen live in this strange football world where if everything goes right, nobody says their name. But if something goes wrong, everybody suddenly becomes an expert. Andrew talked about how misunderstood offensive line play is. People see a sack and immediately blame the line without understanding protection, communication, the call, or how much trust has to exist between 5 people moving as one. And I think that's a bigger metaphor for his whole episode, because so much of what Andrew does well is not flashy. It's the preparation, consistency, communication, service, and community work. It is being dependable, being someone coaches trust, and being someone teammates can count on. It's showing up in rooms where maybe nobody is clapping, but your presence still matters. And that matters to me because football is not only built by the stars. It's built by the people who do the work that does not always get celebrated. And honestly, that is the perfect place to land the season 1 reflection. Because season 1 reminded us that football is never just football. And season 2 is going to build directly off that. Now, before we get too emotional, we are going to shift gears a little bit. Because Blitz and Bloom is football with feelings. Yes. But it is also still football. So we're going to get into my Blitz and Bloom CFL preseason rankings. These are not deep scouting reports. These are gut check, preseason vibe rankings, 3 words per team, no hiding. This is me ranking teams by talent, staff, culture, coaching, and overall organizational aura. So with that being said, number 9, Ottawa Red Blacks. Overwhelm, toxic, ineptitude. Number 8, Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Aging, complacency, green. Number 7, Toronto Argonauts. Chad, homeless, inconsistent. Number 6, Hamilton Tiger Cats. Mentorship, momentum, fan base. Number 5, Montreal Alouettes. Scrappy, crafty, coaching. Number 4, Edmonton Elks. Internal, continuity, peaking. Number 3, Calgary Stampeders. Redemption, rally, expectations. Number 2, BC Lions. Rourke, receivers, D-line. And number 1, the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Leadership, consistency, culture. And that is where I have the league sitting before the season starts. Will I be right? Probably not completely. No one ever is. Will I pretend I was right later, even if one part of this hits? Absolutely. That is called confidence or delusion, depends on who you ask. And that brings us to what comes next. Season 2. As we transition into the CFL season, Blitz and Bloom is going to shift with the football calendar. We're going to get more into the week-to-week rhythm of the CFL season. That means weekly mini episodes where I'll touch on my picks of the week, the matchups I'm watching, the storylines I think matter, and the things I think fans should be paying attention to beyond the obvious headlines. But the interviews are not going away. We're just going to let the pros do pro things while they're in season. The interviews in season 2 are going to focus on the roots and builders of the game. The women and men behind the growth of female football. The ones I've worked side by side with, been inspired by, and pulled into this beautiful chaos of building something from the ground up. These are the people who make the game possible before the cameras show up. The ones building teams, organizing leagues, coaching girls, creating standards, and doing the work that eventually becomes history. Because if season 1 was about the human side of football, season 2 is going to be about the people building the future of football. So as we close season 1, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to every guest who trusted me with their story. TJ Lee, Vernon Adams Jr., John Bowman, Nathan Rourke, Jonah Tavai, Manny Rugumba, Andrew Peirson. Thank you for showing up with honesty, humor, vulnerability, wisdom, and a willingness to talk about more than just football. Thank you to everyone who listened, shared, commented, sent feedback, or told me that a conversation landed with them. Season 1 was the beginning. It was messy in the way beginnings are messy. It was honest. It was personal. It was me figuring out what the show wanted to become while also trusting that the heart of it was already there. Football with feelings, leadership without the bullshit. The human side of a game that teaches you to get hit, get up, and grow. And I keep coming back to this. Football is never just football. So yes, this is the end of season 1, but it is not the end of the story. We're going back to the foundation. We are stepping into the CFL season. We are telling the story of builders, and we are just getting started. This is Blitz and Bloom. See you in season 2.